The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Okay, so wow, that was President Donald Trump yesterday. He was standing alongside Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House in a briefing after they had a meeting. Really, I think there's the only way you can say is just kind of shocked everyone. Certainly shocked me, sent shockwaves around the world too. And apparently even Ambassador Chaz Freeman, a friend of the show here, I didn't think we could be shocked about some stuff that he said because I don't think anyone saw this coming. I just wonder what's your first reaction when you heard that we're going to own the Gaza Strip?
Well, it's radical lunacy, to quote a phrase that the president has applied to others. Makes no sense at all. There's nothing in it for the United States. He's treating it like a real estate development project, like a slum landlord, clearing a slum and building buildings and moving the people who live there, God knows where. I mean, it's been very clear from the beginning that Egypt, Jordan, Indonesia, mentioned by Witkoff, his special envoy, will not take the Palestinians. The Palestinians will not go. They have suffered terribly in order to remain. But I think this is, it's interesting. He was reading from cards, which means this was prepared, probably by Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who's always seen the Gaza Strip as a place to develop what, as the president put it, a Middle Eastern Riviera. When he says lots of jobs for the people there, he's not talking about the Palestinians, whom he proposes to remove. He's talking about settlements from Israel. And Mr. Netanyahu looked like the canary, like the cat who'd swallowed the canary. There were several glimpses of him smirking as all this went down. It's absolutely nuts. The one thing that could happen if we actually did it would be that we jump into a military quagmire. We increase the blowback. We provide a justification for more terrorism against Americans at home and abroad. We alienate not just the Arab world, but the entire Islamic world, all 2 billion of them. And we lose further credibility in the global community. I know even Europeans would be shocked by this.
Well, yeah, certainly there's been much reports of a lot of anxiety in that there was even more so in the Middle East, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But I think possibly because of that pushback, the White House issued a, what's become a classic walkback just shortly, I guess about a couple of hours ago, just not long ago, where Caroline Leavitt apparently was asked about how all this is going to work, and she seemed to walk it back.
The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. This is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region. We've had the same people pushing the same solutions to this problem for decades. And it's been made very clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza.
Okay, so we're going to own the Gaza Strip, but we're not actually going to pay for anything or use any of our troops on there. What does it mean then to own the Strip? How do you read this?
A real estate deal of some sort. And I think the assumption is, the classic assumption, someone, the Saudis or someone will pay for this. Well, the backlash from the Arab world has been fierce, probably accounting in part for that walk back of the president's statement. I have never seen a statement as forthright, strong, and forceful as the one that the Saudis issued. They said they will not normalize with Israel until there is a separate Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem. So we've seen a lot of talk from pro-Israeli elements in the United States and from people in Israel saying, well, we're on the verge of normalizing with Saudi Arabia. That's the key to everything. This is a pipe dream. I don't know what the president may have had in mind, what Jared Kushner put in his head, but it makes no sense. It's just a disaster for the United States. It might be great for Israel. It's not great for us.
You'd mentioned the blowback from the region. I want to just show you a couple of examples of that. Marwan Bishara was asked this morning what he had heard from some of the Arab regimes, and here's what he had to say.
The 6 members of the contact group of the Arab League that was commissioned of being in touch with the outside world since the war on Gaza started, they all 6 of them have come out against the idea of displacing Palestinians outside Gaza and basically sent that answer to the Trump administration. They sent it to the United Nations, and they basically made it public to the whole world. That, of course, doesn't seem to have convinced the Trump administration. President Trump continues to insist that, well, they said no, but we will make them say yes. I think none of the things that he's talking about will come to pass. I frankly think, and maybe it's because it's almost 4 a.m. Doha time and I'm pretty tired, I think it's absolutely absurd what he said. I think it's absolutely illogical, irrational, utterly unrealistic, and frankly idiotic to think that you can move 2 million Palestinians outside Gaza today and instead take ownership of it and make it into a beachside property development run by the likes of Trump.
Do you think that there was ever any prospect that anyone in the Middle East could be convinced that because of Trump's force of personality that he could get people to agree to this? Or does that tell you that whoever's advising President Trump isn't exactly tied in with the reality on the ground?
Well, the Secretary of State, Mr. Rubio, wasn't there, which may have been part of the reason for this absurdity. It is an absurdity, as Marwan Bishara said. It's not going to happen. The Jordanians, in fact, have said that if Israel tries to resettle the Palestinians in Jordan, they will regard that as an act of war and will declare war on Israel. I think we haven't heard that from the Egyptians, but this threatens the entire Camp David framework. Basically, Mr. Trump is saying, well, we give aid to Egypt so it will remain at peace with Israel, and we could stop that aid. Well, the consequence of that would be a resumption of the state of war that was ended by Jimmy Carter at Camp David. So this is very fundamental. It reflects an absolutely appalling lack of understanding of the region and what has happened there. And I would remind you, probably a couple 100,000 Palestinians were murdered in Gaza. Then this did not shake Palestinian will to remain in Gaza. And in fact, we've seen scenes of Palestinians returning. We just saw a scene of Palestinians attempting to clean out the rubble of an apartment building as they try to make some home for themselves where Israel has destroyed it.
And in fact, speaking of the Palestinians, the response from Hamas itself was equally rapid and unequivocal.
Senior Hamas officials now have released statements following the comments by Donald Trump on the permanent resettlement of Palestinians from Gaza. And they say, and we quote, "We consider it a recipe for creating chaos and tension in our region. Our people in the Gaza Strip will not allow these plans to pass. What is required is an end to the occupation and aggression against our people, not their expulsion from their land. Our people in Gaza have thwarted displacement and deportation plans under bombardment for more than 15 months. They are rooted in their land and will not accept any schemes aimed at uprooting them from their homeland."
Now, that was specifically the Hamas leadership, but do you see any evidence that that's not a similar view among even just the regular Palestinian people?
No, I think Hamas really does speak for the Palestinian people on this matter. There are many Palestinians who have complaints against Hamas, but there's no doubt that it has strong backing from the vast majority of the Palestinian people. Whereas the Palestinian Authority, which we pay for, USAID actually, ironically, and the Israelis use as a proxy to control the West Bank, has absolutely no credibility either on the West Bank or in Gaza. So there are other factions among the Palestinians, but you can be sure they all agree with Hamas on this point.
And I think that the disconnect between President Trump's understanding of the Palestinian people, their resolve, I think is a big part of this, because I want to go back and play a couple of the comments that he made when he was explaining his decisions here. He said, listen, there's been decades of death that has preceded this, and I just want to stop it.
The Gaza thing has not worked. It's never worked. And I feel very differently about Gaza than a lot of people. I think they should get a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, and we get some people to put up the money to build it and make it nice and make it habitable and enjoyable and make it a home.
They don't want to leave, though. Palestinians say they don't want to leave.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site. It's a pure demolition site. If we could find the right piece of land or numerous pieces of land and build them some really nice places with plenty of money in the area, that's for sure. I think that would be a lot better than going back to Gaza, which has had just decades and decades of death.
You know, I think that he, in about in the middle of that clip there, I think he really exposed the error of his logic, because he said, I don't see how anyone could want to live in that, because he's putting himself in that position. But you just saw Hamas say that. I think you're referring to at least some of the scenes that I saw when the Palestinian people were first allowed, I guess a week or so ago, back into the northern part. And you would think that if it was us, that to be allowed to go back into nothing but just rubble and dust, that they would be despondent. But they were cheering and everything. And you said you've seen some where they're cleaning off the rubble, and they would rather have their land and their home than to go to any wonderful and nice place, as Trump put it.
Well, there isn't any wonderful, nice place on offer. Egypt and Jordan, Indonesia have all said they will not cooperate with this. Trump's assertion that they will cooperate implies that he's going to use some kind of gangster-like gun to their head to try to make them cooperate. But there are limits to what people will do. The Palestinian cause, Hamas successfully destroyed the flanking maneuver that Jared Kushner and others developed during the first Trump administration, the so-called Abraham Accords. They put the Palestinian self-determination issue back on the global agenda with a vengeance. And here I want to say, we keep hearing, well, Hamas can't have any role in the government, in the governance of any part of Palestine. Who the hell are we to say that? Isn't that something for the Palestinian people to say? So this is entirely a colonial settlement exercise. It's imperialism. It has no legitimacy. It is actually discrediting us rather than gaining support for us, either among the Palestinians or anyone else. The exception is the Israelis. There's a recent poll out that shows that only 3% of Israelis think ethnically cleansing the Palestinians is immoral. Only 3%.
Wow.
We are dealing with a society that is imbued with hatred and contempt for the people it lives amongst. Israel has no diplomacy to speak of. It uses force. And when Mr. Trump says, well, Gaza hasn't worked out for decades, he didn't mention why that was. Because Israel was, quote, mowing the grass, meaning chopping off the head of anybody who stuck up their head and objected to the dispossession or abuse, cruelty, imprisonment, or murder of Palestinians by Israelis. So I think This is worse than nonsense. It's a crime.
You know, I'm puzzled by something because the things that have happened here that, I mean, if you've been paying any attention at all to the Palestinian people and what's been going on for decades, you would know that, of course, they're not going to take any kind of forced repatriation. They don't want to go anywhere else. They want their land, etc. So to make a statement on this on that level would seem to be making himself unsuccessful. Then you add on top of that, overlay it with the bigger issue that all the states, not just in the region, but as you mentioned, elsewhere in the Islamic world, are just categorically against this kind of thing. So he seems that Trump has set himself up in a position to just be hammered down pretty hard because this can't work. There's nowhere for them to go. No one's going to take them, and they don't want to go. And Hamas is still firmly in control. What does that tell us about what could happen next?
Was obscured by the shock of Mr. Trump's announcement about Gaza. He has basically endorsed the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. Throw the Palestinians there out. So he's given Mr. Netanyahu everything that Mr. Netanyahu ever wanted. And you could see Mr. Netanyahu smirking as he played Trump like some kind of a musical instrument. Entirely a man who, obviously a very good politician, utterly dishonest, utterly without honor, and utterly able to manipulate Mr. Trump.
But so I mean, I can see that. And actually, we're going to play a clip here in a minute where those smirks are self-evident. But I'm looking at it for the moment from Trump's perspective. I mean, he doesn't strike me as a stupid man. He's got a businessman. He's got a real estate view, as you said. But I mean, he can typically read a spreadsheet, and he can know that he wouldn't want to go down a path that almost guaranteed failure at the big level, and it's going to make him look really bad. Why do you suppose he would have gone down that path?
Well, there is, of course, the $150 million campaign donation from Miriam Adelson and other donations for which he pledged to support this sort of Zionist extremism. And of course, the extremists in Israel are absolutely ecstatic at what he said and will be quite upset when they see the walkback that you played. But this is entirely possible that this is venal and corrupt, not an act of conscience, but that he was basically bought.
And now, one of the possibilities, we'll just give the benefit of the doubt, is that maybe he was able to be manipulated by this in this way because he doesn't have an understanding of how things work, and maybe he thought this actually could work. When he makes one of the comments he made here is he said, "Hey, you have to learn from history." So the question
is for everybody. This would be where they can partake in terms of jobs and living and all of the other benefits. And I think it's very important. It just doesn't work the other way. You know, you can't keep trying. They just has been going along for so many decades, you can't even count. You just can't keep doing. You have to learn from history. You can't keep doing the same mistake over and over again. Gaza is a hellhole right now. It was before the bombing started, frankly. And we're going to give people a chance to live in a beautiful community that's safe and secure. And I think you're going to see a tremendous outflowing of support. I can tell you, I spoke to other leaders of countries in the Middle East, and they love the idea. They say it would really bring stability, and what we need is stability.
So the question arises, whose history is he reading? Who's giving him a rendition of that history? Because he says, you alluded to this a second ago, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over. And true enough, I certainly would agree with that. But who's giving him the advice that this change is something that would actually work?
Well, two comments. First, the reason it hasn't worked is because it's entirely a military solution that's been applied by Israel for decades. There's been no diplomacy, no political agreement, no willingness on the part of the Israelis to accommodate Palestinian rights in any respect, no willingness to explore peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians. The Israeli objective has been to remove the Palestinians. Mr. Trump now comes along and says, oh, that's the solution. Maybe he should learn from history. That has not worked. The proposal to remove the Palestinians has not worked. The second thing is, I noticed that earlier he said, oh, there's lots of money in the region. We're not going to pay for it. Well, I don't wonder why on earth he thinks Arab countries in the region, which is what he's obviously referring to, are going to pay for something they adamantly oppose. And, it isn't just Gaza that's at stake. There is the status of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which the extremists are trying to take over and destroy, to build the second temple on that site. Ironically, archaeologists suggest that is not where the first temple actually was. But in any event, this is guaranteed to lose friends and make new enemies.
One of the things that Netanyahu actually talked about during one of the commentary was about the Abraham Accords. So he said, he was asked specifically, will this help or hurt the potential for Abraham Accords? Because this was actually before Saudi Arabia made the comment that you referred to. They said they've been opposed to it, but Trump says that he can talk them into it. And do you think it's possible? And so Netanyahu says, well, we certainly hope it is, because we want to have improved relationships with Saudi Arabia. Is that also a pipe dream? And is there any path that Israel could improve relations with Saudi Arabia?
Sure. The Saudis have made it clear on several occasions, as early as 1982 at Fez in Morocco, and again in Beirut in 2002, that if there is self-determination for the Palestinians, and the Palestinians have a state with its capital in East Jerusalem, they will normalize relations with Israel. And they will bring, they said, every other Islamic country, all 57. Sorry about that. That is my wife calling, so I should have taken it, like the governor of New York did on the stage. Anyway, now I've lost my track of.
We were talking about normalized relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yeah, I think the Saudis have made it clear for years they'd bring the entire Islamic world, all 57 members of the Islamic Cooperation Organization. They would bring all the Arabs with them. And Israel has never expressed any interest in that, because the condition is peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians. And Israel wants the Palestinians gone. So Mr. Trump has just issued a frontal challenge, not just to the Arabs and the Palestinians, but to the entire Muslim world. And I would add that whether you're Muslim or not, lots of people in Latin America, for example, are entirely sympathetic with the Palestinian demand for self-determination. And they ask, if Israelis can have self-determination, why can't Palestinians? What did Palestinians do to European Jews? Were they part of the Holocaust? Why should they pay the price for what Europeans did to other Europeans who were Jewish? There's no justice here at all. And therefore, this is a very dumb move, whether the president is smart, as you suggest, or not.
Well, and whether he's smart or not, it certainly appears that he has been highly influenced by Benjamin Netanyahu. And you had talked at the opening of this about some smirks from Netanyahu. We put together a bit of a mashup here that shows what I think is Netanyahu correctly understanding how to approach Trump, how to butter him up to get what he wants. And I'll leave it up to you to decide if it succeeded.
This is a testament to your friendship and support for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. I've said this before, I'll say it again. You are the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House. And that's why the people of Israel have such enormous respect for you. In your first term, you recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. You moved the American embassy there. You recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. You withdrew from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. I remember we spoke about it You said, this is the worst deal I've ever seen. I'm elected, I'm walking out of it. That's exactly what you did. Now, in the first days of your second term, you picked up right where you left off. Your leadership helped bring our hostages home, among them American citizens. You freed up munitions that have been withheld from Israel. They had been withheld from Israel in the midst of a 7-front war for our existence. And you just freed it.
He was asked right about that same time by one of the other people in the reporters, who deserved the credit for getting the hostages released? Was it Trump or was it Biden? And he did not hesitate to say that it wasn't Biden. So he's just continued to butter him up. How do you view that?
No, I mean, that's gross flattery for someone who inhales flattery like other people inhale marijuana. He just can't resist it. And you could see the president reacting, joyous at all of that praise. So Netanyahu's got his number. There's no doubt about it. And we see that in this ridiculous result, preposterous proposal, which isn't going to go anywhere and which is going to end up costing the United States a great deal. And I'd add that all this takes place at a moment when Mr. Trump desperately needs some support from constituencies like the pro-Zionist elements in the Jewish communities in the United States. Why? Because he's engaged in a constitutional coup d'etat. He is sending people who do not have security clearances, have not been vetted, are unknown, do not work for the government, are not subject to its conflict of interest laws, in to control the payments function in the US Treasury in ways that would enable Elon Musk, who directs them, who also was not elected, is not a member of the US government, does not head an organization that exists except informally. There's been no congressional action to establish the Department of Government Efficiency, so-called. It's the Department of Government Chaos so far. And things, there's a lot of pushback on this. People are getting angry, and why shouldn't they? It's not a violation of democracy, perhaps. Mr. Trump was elected, although he wasn't elected to do all these things. That was never clear. In fact, he said explicitly that the Heritage Foundation Project 2025 was something he knew absolutely nothing about. Now he's whipping out executive orders drafted by them or some AI, apparently, at a furious rate. Nobody can make sense of them. He's demoralized the entire federal establishment. The Congress, meanwhile, and others are not offering effective resistance to this. This is the end of our republic unless it is reversed. And there's no prospect of impeachment because the Republicans dominate the House and Senate and are subservient to Mr. Trump. They have no principles. They have no character. They demonstrate no courage. And the same must be said of the Democratic leadership. What a bunch of wimps. So from my point of view, horrifying as Mr. Trump's dangerous bungling of Middle East policy is, the far more serious issue is what he's doing to our constitutional republic.
Well, we'll have to see if the guardrails are able to push back on some of that. Although I would argue that at least on this foreign policy issue here, other forces are going to be forming guardrails that are going to prevent him from going in the direction that he wanted to. And in fact, that leads me to the next question that I have is, given the complete disaster about how the Palestinian people responded and how all of the Arab regimes around there responded, there is no prospect at all that any of this stuff will actually be turned into action. Well, then where does that leave us? And a couple of big important issues. Let's look at the first one is, what is the impact on the current ceasefire between Israel and Hamas? There's supposed to be negotiating phase 2 of this 3-phase operation right now. Where's that going to go?
Well, despite the statement that somehow we're going to take over Gaza and own it, and we're not going to have boots on the ground, we're going to have Americans in Gaza. That's the whole point, and they're going to get shot at. Hamas is not defeated. The Palestinians are not defeated. They have not given up their dream of self-determination. They will not succumb. They will not submit to us any more than they have done to the Israelis. So the only solution to this is a political one, and that involves recognizing Palestinian rights. And Israel's not prepared to do that. And I'm sorry to say our government now apparently is not.
But even in terms of this ceasefire, I think that either at that press conference here or a previous comment that Netanyahu made also yesterday, he specifically reiterated that his goal still is, I think he said he had 3 goals. I believe was the second of which was the destruction of Hamas. So whatever this ceasefire is supposed to accomplish, in his mind, he's already moving into a follow-on phase, which is going to go back to fighting and destroy Hamas. How do you think that could unfold?
Exactly right. His strategy from the beginning, very typical of Israeli negotiating behavior, is to make a limited number of concessions for immediate benefits and kick the can down the road with regard to all the other ones, preserving the right to ignore whatever promises implied commitments have been made by the Israeli negotiators. So he's told his cabinet, he's told Bezalel Smotrich from the beginning. He had assurances from the incoming president, as well as the outgoing Mr. Biden, that he could start the war at will. So what he is undoubtedly hoping for is that all of what Mr. Trump said will provoke Hamas into resuming military action against the Israeli forces who are still in Gaza, or against Israel proper outside the wall, outside the fence, which will give him an excuse to resume the genocide. There's no doubt what he wants. He wants genocide. He'll settle for urban renewal and the renewal of the population. The removal of the population to some other undisclosed place. He just wants to get rid of them one way or another, dead or alive.
And if Hamas doesn't play along and doesn't provide that reason for them to go back in, and they abide by the terms of the ceasefire, then what does Israel do?
Then Mr. Trump has a problem, because he's proposed a solution that can't work. And Israel's not going to give up its drive to get rid of the Palestinians. So if they're not removed peacefully, Israel will go right back to doing what it was doing, which won't work. We've seen the Israeli military and intelligence services for many, many months have been saying, this is a failure. This will not work. You cannot wipe out Hamas. You cannot destroy the will of the Palestinian people by bombing them, strafing them, sniping at them, droning them, and so forth. Israel has paid a huge price for this disastrous policy there. Mr. Trump just gave him a huge gift. For what? What did we get out of that? What did the United States get out of this?
Right. I've often wondered, he signed an executive order that there will be an America First foreign policy. He directed the State Department to follow that. And I am having a hard time seeing where America's first priority is any of the things that were laid out today.
Mr. Trump says that he admires President McKinley, who was famous for doing, among other things, the Spanish-American War and taking the Philippines. But the difference between Mr. McKinley, who, on the basis of ignorance, wanted to Christianize and civilize the Filipinos, who were already Catholic and who had quite a civilization of their own, Mr. McKinley had mistaken but noble humanitarian and religious motives. Mr. Trump's motives are real estate development. This says something about our country and how it has changed over the intermittent 125 years.
Now, the other question that is now going to be really coming up to front and center was, it did get a little bit of notice and it was addressed at one point during this press conference, but I haven't seen any headlines on it. I guess there's so many other things to talk about, but that's the West Bank. During his conversation, Trump said that within 4 weeks, he's going to address the issue of Israeli annexation of the West Bank. To me, that was like a major headline that didn't hardly get any advice or any impact I wonder if you would address what that means and what the ramifications are.
Well, this is payoff for the Marian Adelson $150 million donor gift to Mr. Trump. That was the price for it, that he would agree to the annexation of the West Bank. So there's no surprise here.
And I'm sorry, can you just explain what that means from an Israeli perspective to annex the West Bank? What would that graphically mean on the ground?
That would mean the end of the Palestinian Authority. It would mean ethnic cleansing with a vengeance. It would mean no restrictions on settlements.
And where would they annex? Where would they force them out to? I mean, the West Bank people.
They might very well deal with them the way they have dealt with Gaza, genocide. You know, they try to push them into Jordan. That I mentioned earlier, Jordan has already said that if they try to do that, this will be an act of war, and Jordan will declare war on Israel. Jordan can't survive the influx.
I hadn't seen that. That's new. That was news to me. That's alarming.
It is alarming. Well, this whole thing is alarming. It makes no sense. Mr. Trump says we should learn from history. It's pretty clear he doesn't have any grasp of the history, except as conveyed to him by Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is hardly a dispassionate or objective teacher.
So where do we go from here? If you can't get the Palestinian people out of the Gaza Strip, if you can't force any other Arab regime or Muslim regime to accept them, Trump has put his credibility on the line here. Netanyahu wants to destroy Hamas. How do all of these things work out? Where do we go from here?
The war resumes. That's the obvious answer. You know, if you can't find a peaceful solution to a problem, countries will resort to war. And Israel has decided to annihilate the Palestinians. It's willing to do that. If Mr. Trump can remove them, then Israel's willing to let them go. But if they try to stay, the war of annihilation will continue.
Now, there was a big issue in the even in the Democratic presidential primary season with a large number of Americans that were very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. We saw lots of protests around at various campuses, et cetera. Those would seem to still be in place. Would the American people just sit passively by if the war is resumed and the current administration funded it and continued to give them all the bombs, the 2,000 pounders and everything else that they've asking for? Could we do that? What impact do you think that would have in the U.S.?
Well, I hope not. But of course, as we all know, the greatest enemy of the First Amendment and of academic freedom is the Zionist lobby in the United States. And they have imposed legal and other restrictions on university campuses. They held highly prejudicial hearings and forced out some university presidents over this issue. And Mr. Trump has carried this a step farther by saying he's going to surveil universities, and those non-citizens who raise questions about Israeli behavior will be deported. So we are entering an era of quasi-totalitarian control on this issue in the United States. And I think, Mr. Trump is also trying to change the role of the U.S. military to an internal security role. It starts with the deployment to the border. It is posse comitatus, which was a basic rule of that the army, our army, would never involve itself in domestic security matters, is being succeeded by the open engagement of the army. Mr. Milley, who objected to this, General Milley, who objected to this in the first Trump term, has had his portrait removed from the Pentagon, his security detail, which was to protect him from retaliation for the Trump assassination of Iranian General Soleimani, removed. So now he has no protection. He's not honored. He's dishonored. He's not the only one. So we are looking at a very vindictive administration that has no respect for the Bill of Rights, has apparently no understanding of the Constitution or a willingness to defer to it, is contemptuous of Congress, has packed the Supreme Court with people of like mind, political mind, and there's no checks and balances. So anything could happen. I don't know what will happen.
Well, that's that's not a real optimistic outlook there, but it may be an accurate one. We just have to hope that enough people can rise up and not accept this, and even for the First Amendment ability to speak their mind, and maybe it'll get enough attention. But I like to think that enough Americans would just be horrified if Netanyahu then went back and started literally just killing everybody in the Palestinian areas. We have to hope he
Well,
doesn't.
I think most Americans were horrified when he did it in the Biden administration. And that had something to do with people voting against Mr. Biden and his successor as candidate, Kamala Harris. This issue is not going to go away because Israel is going to keep doing what it's doing until it gets rid of all the Palestinians. And if we don't, the international community, the United States, which is the most powerful element of that community, do not stop it, it will continue. I realize I should have made a comment on the Iran issue that Mr. Trump raised, and that is this: there is no evidence that Iran has a bomb program. Bill Burns, when he left, the last director of CIA, said there was no evidence of this. Mossad has consistently said there is no evidence. What there is a nuclear program that gives Iran potentially the ability to make the decision to build a bomb. There is no evidence, no indication at all that it has made such a decision. In fact, quite the contrary. So what we're doing with maximum pressure on Iran is likely to result, in my view, in the same result like to produce the same results that it produced with North Korea. North Korea did not have nuclear weapons. Maximum pressure by the United States led it to build them. And the North Koreans can now hit targets anywhere in the United States with ICBMs with nuclear warheads on them. We are risking repeating that history with Iran. The answer to this issue is to sit down with Iran, as we did with the JCPOA, and construct an international control regime that assures us that Iran will never make the decision to build a bomb. And I say all this despite the fact, of course, that Israel has a nuclear arsenal, which began with the theft of uranium from Pennsylvania, and which was carried out under a veil of lies to us at Dimona. International inspections occurred at Dimona, but they were diverted to the wrong places. And Israel has a record of doing exactly what it accuses Iran of doing. But there is no evidence that Iran has abandoned the religious scruples that have led it to ban all weapons of mass destruction from its arsenal. We may be getting close if Mr. Trump, as he intends to do, reverts to maximum pressure. We may get close to overcoming those scruples, and we'll all be sorry, because that will set off a chain reaction in the region. Saudi Arabia will build nuclear weapons. Egypt will build nuclear weapons. Turkey will build nuclear weapons. Iraq will very likely go back to building nuclear weapons, which it tried to do under Saddam Hussein.
Do you see any concerns or worries in the near term, even outside of if Iran goes nuclear, but that if things get bad enough for the Palestinian people, if Israel goes down some of the paths that you fear that they may, that whether it's Jordan or Egypt or anybody else may militarily turn against Israel? Is that even a possibility?
It's becoming a possibility. It would not be a decision lightly taken. But I would remind everyone that in 1973, during the so-called Yom Kippur or Ramadan War, where Egyptian forces conducted a brilliant crossing of the Suez Canal and fought in the Sinai, and Ariel Sharon then crossed the canal with tank forces and conducted a brilliant campaign in Egypt against the Egyptians. The Arab world instituted an oil embargo at great cost to themselves against us for supporting Israel. So it's not as though there's not a history of them being pushed too hard. and too far. So I don't know what they'll do, but I note that every single Arab country, the Arab League, the steering group that Marwan Bishara referred to, have all been absolutely adamant that there will be no compromise on this issue of removing Palestinians from Palestinian territory, whether it's Gaza or the West Bank.
See, and last question, let's look to Europe. Is there any prospect that there could be enough revulsion if the war restarts that they could bring diplomatic or political pressure against Israel or the United States support of the war that could have any impact? Is there enough? I know there's a lot of regimes that are very friendly to Trump and would probably jump on and enjoy it, but is there enough movement of the people, do you think? Is that even possible?
Well, European politics at this moment, whether in France or in Germany, the two main actors within the European Union, it's very fragile. This is an issue that could push people away from their historical support for Israel. And so I think the protests are likely to continue. I mean, ironically, we are the country with the First Amendment with the right to petition the government, which means protest. They don't have that amendment, but in many ways they've been more vociferous and more active in protests even than the kids, largely Jewish kids, on our campuses. You know, one of the other things that's happening here is Judaism and Zionism are separating. They're being forced apart. Religious Jews, I would cite Peter Beinart as an example, a religious Orthodox Jew, also a very prominent intellectual, very realistic, has condemned Zionism as a violation of Jewish values. He's not the only one. Many Jews see Israel as a betrayal of their faith, as the negation of it. So this is alienating Israel from the so-called diaspora. This is not a diaspora. These Jews in the United States are Americans. They're not Israelis, and they should not be treated by Mr. Netanyahu as though they were Israelis and taken advantage of. The fact that there are a few plutocrats who give lots of money to the Zionist lobby doesn't alter the fact that most Jewish communities are not as slavishly devoted to Israel as they are.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see how all this plays out. Not a good start to just not even 2.5 weeks into the Trump administration, number two. A lot of moving pieces, and we're going to continue to follow, but we really appreciate, especially this deep historical and regional context that you're able to provide. We're very grateful for it. Thank you for coming on today.
Next time, choose a happy topic.
I will do my best. Can't make any guarantees, but we'll certainly try. We appreciate you guys coming on and being with us today as well. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet on your way out. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.